They called him an abomination, but he knows the circumstances surrounding his conception do not determine his value. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Mark Roepke stood in front of the U.S. Supreme Court in 2022 when it was announced that the High Court had finally overturned the Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey abortion decisions. As a child born as a result of rape, this day made a deep impact on Mark that he will never forget. And we are honored that Mark joins us on this program to share his powerful story and how he literally amplifies the pro-life message on Capitol Hill. But first, Liberty Counsel's Freedom Alert is next. It's a victory for life in North Dakota. The North Dakota Supreme Court issued a ruling that restores the state's near-total abortion ban. The law bans abortion except in cases of rape or incest prior to 6 weeks gestation and when deemed necessary to preserve the life or health of the mother. The law makes performing an elective abortion a felony carrying a punishment of up to 5 years in prison with fines of thousands of dollars. In 2023, a state judge ruled the abortion ban was unconstitutionally vague as to when an abortion could be performed to save the mother's life. Yet abortion is never mentioned in the state constitution. In the Supreme Court's decision, the lower court ruling is reversed and the pro-life law is now restored. We must continue to fight for life. I'm pleased to be joined on Freedom Alive with our guest, Mark Roepke. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Mark, and I'm excited to be able to share your story of life and what it was like to be there at the United States Supreme Court when Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey were overturned. Mark, thank you for joining us. Tell us about the circumstances of your biological mother, how you came about, the challenges that maybe she or others might have faced, and even you have faced.
Yeah. So on July 4th, 1970, a girl who had just graduated the 8th grade went to a 4th of July party with her cousin and unfortunately became the victim of rape and walked away from that party with me. And I was born 9 months later. And my mother, being a fairly mature 14-year-old, understood that she could not give me the life that she wanted for her son. And so she graciously gave me up for adoption so that I could be raised in a family with 2 parents and with siblings and in a much more stable place. And people, question whether she had a choice because I was born pre-Roe. And as she has told me, abortion wasn't legal, but it was available. And so certainly she made that choice to have me, to keep me. She never saw me as the rapist's child. She always saw me as her child and a gift from God. And I'm very lucky for that. And there's a lot of kids out there, unfortunately, who aren't that lucky. But my mom gave me up for adoption, but she left a note in my adoption record. She actually, 2 different things that she did with my adoption record. She checked up as often as she was allowed to try and get information about me while I was growing up. And she left a note to be on the very, very top of my adoption records that if I ever came looking for her, that she was open to that she wanted any information given possible to find her. And so I grew up in a family with 4 adopted children, 3 homegrown children, so 4 store-boughts and 3 homegrowns, as we refer to ourselves. And we had quite a bit of diversity. My 2 sisters were biracial. And so we had a fairly diverse family for being an Iowa farm family. And when I turned 19, well, actually, when I turned 18, I knew I could start looking for my biological parents. And I kind of already understood somewhat the circumstances of my conception. I knew there was no way that a 14-year-old giving birth was legal. So I knew that it was at least statutory rape from the very beginning. And so before I went looking, I worked with my pastor quite a bit. And he was a very good pastor, Michael Wolfram. And he had me walk through kind of every scenario that we could imagine before I went looking for my mother. Are you prepared to find a gravestone? Are you prepared to find someone who wants absolutely nothing to do with you? Are you prepared to find somebody who is completely diametrically opposed to your beliefs? So we went through a lot of counseling and a lot of working through preparing for kind of any contingency. But just shortly after my 19th birthday, the court records were unsealed and I was allowed to find my biological mother.
And where did you find her?
So it turns out she lived about 75 miles away. I was living in Sioux City, Iowa at the time, and she was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And it was kind of interesting. I had gotten her information a little bit earlier, just basic information. Basically, her name was all I got when the court records were initially opened. And I didn't get my adoption records until about a month later. But when I got my original records, I went to the library and I started calling every Schmidt in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, because I knew that's where she was from. And I got as far as Lee Schmidt. And it was 9 o'clock at night. And back then you didn't call people past 9 o'clock at night. So I stopped at Lee Schmidt at 9 o'clock. Well, life got in the way. Things came up. I had to leave college due to financial issues, and I had to move home and get a job. And when I finally got my adoption records about a month later, found out that my father's name was Leroy Schmidt, the very next name in the phone book. Had I made one more phone call, I would have found her a month earlier. But when I did call the number, it was very interesting. I got a hold of my grandfather, my biological maternal grandfather, and he was very hard of hearing from working in a machine shop or an auto shop for many years, and he couldn't hear me on the phone. And he's like, hold on, Ma, and he handed the phone off, and he gave it to my grandma. And as soon as I asked my grandma, I'm Mark Roepke, do you have a daughter by the name of Cynthia Schmidt? And she said, this is Shane, isn't it? Well, my birth name was Shane Adam Schmidt. They'd been waiting 19 years.
So she knew that immediately when you just asked that one question?
Yes. From that one question, she knew who it was that was talking to her.
That's amazing. Did you ever ask her, how did she know? How did she know that? What was it just some...
I don't know. It was such an unbelievable thing to me at the moment that I never really thought to ask. But she immediately said, I got to get a hold of Cindy. Can I get a phone number to call you back at? I'd love to talk to you, but I want Cindy to talk to you first. And so she immediately got me on the phone with my biological mother. She was at work. She took a break and she called me and she goes, I want to talk to you, but I'm at work. Can I call you a little bit later? And I said, absolutely. And we spoke that night for several hours. And within 2 or 3 days, she came down to visit me. And we met for the very first time.
Wow. How was that moment when you saw your mom for the very first time, your biological mother?
Well, I don't look a whole lot like my biological mother. I look a lot more like my biological father. So it was knowing you're biologically related to somebody is different than being related to somebody. You know what I mean? The blood bond is different. And I've never had that in my life. I never had people that I actually was blood bonded to. I grew up in a family of very nice people, but they weren't blood to me. They didn't look like me. They didn't sound like me. They didn't have mannerisms like me. When I actually got the letter that my biological mother wrote to me when she was in the hospital at 14 years old giving birth to me, I found that my handwriting and hers were almost identical.
Amazing.
And I found that very interesting. And so it was having that different connection. It wasn't my mom, but it was my mother. And a lot of people don't see a difference in those two things, but there is. The mother is the woman who gave you birth and mom is who raised you. And for me, those are two different people and they're different. And one doesn't replace the other.
So so this would have been 18 years after you were born. So obviously now
Correct.
Abortion, 1973, the Roe versus Wade opinion has been in existence for a number of years.
Right.
So about what year are we talking about that you actually saw her? And then did your relationship continue with her afterward?
Yeah. So it was 1990 when I met her. And we've been a part of each other's lives since then. In 2018, she got married to a very nice gentleman, and I got to walk my mom down the aisle at her wedding.
Well, that's amazing.
So that was a pretty unique experience for me.
You know, Mark, I mean, that just really goes to show you the beauty of life. I mean, 18 years before you met your biological mother, you could have been slaughtered. You would have never had the opportunity and the absolute joy. I can't even imagine what it was like for you to walk your biological mother down the aisle for her to get married, the woman that gave birth to you. Share what that means to you, because, you know, there's a lot of rhetoric out there about abortion, and there's a lot of misinformation, but you're a living example of your mom choosing life.
Yeah, and the thing is, the reason that I feel such a calling to tell my story is because in today's age, my mother would have been taken out of school by a guidance counselor, taken to Planned Parenthood without ever telling her parents, and had me killed with no thought of that at all. I was very lucky that my mom was strong in the Lutheran Church and went to a Lutheran home for unwed mothers. And I was given the opportunity for life, and I was adopted through Lutheran Social Services, and I was adopted into a Lutheran family who had a strong religious basis. And I grew up not really knowing I was pro-life, but knowing that we lived on a farm. And while animals have a purpose, and they end up being slaughtered in the end, but that's their purpose. But we would work on the farm sometimes 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, birthing a calf that was having trouble because we valued the life of that calf. And we valued the animal that was giving birth. And to know at an early age, I had heard the word abortion on the school bus. And my dad explained to me what that word meant. And we were a family that was looking to adopt children. We were going out of our way to get children. And to know that people were killing their children out of convenience absolutely horrified me. It was probably the only night of my childhood that I remember that I don't think I slept a wink. And I went through the whole next day at school just shell-shocked, looking at people and thinking that maybe some of these high school girls had abortions and killed their own children. It was truly horrifying to me. And so from that point on, I was pro-life. And when I was a teenager, I went to the state Republican convention, and they needed somebody to give a speech in front of the adult convention. And I gave a very strong pro-life speech and was chosen to speak in front of the adult convention, met the governor of Iowa, good old Terry Branstad, who was there for 24 years, and met him and gave that speech. But I've been pro-life since then, and it's been kind of my life's work. But the thing is I'm not really the guy in front of the camera most of the time. I'm the guy that provides the sound systems. I'm the guy that provides the stage, the podium, the PA systems, the travel logistics for pro-life groups doing bus tours. I managed the 40 Days for Life RV tour here, I guess now 9 years ago. We went to all 48 contiguous states in 40 days, did 126 events in front of killing facilities all over this country. And it's been a calling in my life to do that because I believe I was truly lucky to survive. You know, being born to a 14-year-old girl in this age, that's a death sentence.
I know you're actually doing some of the sound equipment work for one of our ministries, Faith and Liberty in Washington, D.C., that does an annual live nativity scene right there in front of the United States Supreme Court. So God has used you in an amazing way, a life that would never have existed had your mom chosen to abort you, and thinking that that was the right thing to do. And then now you have this beautiful life, a pro-life ministry, and a mom, and was able to literally walk her down the aisle as well. And you also, in addition, have your adoptive parents and all these other siblings that you grew up with, a large family in Iowa.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to point out, you mentioned the Dobbs decision being announced. Well, a lot of people don't realize kind of how Supreme Court decisions come out. They come out on a website. They don't get proclaimed anywhere. But usually there's a group outside in the front of the Supreme Court when big announcements come out, and there definitely was for the Dobbs decision. And somebody reads out the decision. Well, the Dobbs decision was read out from a podium that I built. A child that the other side says should not even exist. built the podium that the end of Roe was announced from.
So when, just for people that, you have the justices that actually announced the decision, there was a leak of this particular decision. I think you were there during that time, too. That was in May when that decision was leaked. And then the official decision came down at the end of June in 2022. So when you're out there in front, of course, you were there about those timeframes. Tell us what was happening when the opinion was leaked, and then when you were there later on throughout these different protests, both pros and cons. There were people that were supportive. There were obviously literally Satanists and people with witchcraft out in front of the United States Supreme Court regarding the Dobbs decision.
Well, I was asked to provide sound for a few of the demonstrations. They kind of had a weekly demonstration that they brought in sound for. And at the very first one of those, I was there working with Students for Life, with Tina Whittington from Students for Life, if you know her. And we were doing this event, and somebody from the other side, they kind of put a center barrier between us, but there was somebody from the other side had a shirt on pro-abortion and blue hair, just what you'd expect the other side to look like in this case. And she was screaming, "What about rape? What about rape? What about rape?" And I said, "Well, I was conceived in rape. Do I not have a right to exist?" And she looked me straight in the face and she said, "You're an abomination who should not exist."
Wow. Wow. I mean, that I think really underscores this death cult idea of abortion.
Yeah.
I mean, you're an individual made in the image of God. The circumstances surrounding your conception do not change your value or that you're born in the very image of God.
Right, and that was the very first time I ever shared my story. I turned around to Tina and I said, "Tina, I need to borrow my PA system for a minute if you don't mind." And she said I looked quite determined. And so she let me use my PA system, and I shared my story for the very first time about being conceived in rape there in front of the Supreme Court. Not even my friends in the pro-life movement knew my story because I'd never shared it. I was ashamed of how I came into this world. And then I realized, and like you just said, and the line that I use now all of the time is, the circumstances of my conception do not determine my worth as a human being. And that is absolutely true. And the other side has this belief that only wanted children should exist and only planned children should exist. Well, how many people exist because one parent wanted something to happen one night and not both parents? Or how many people exist not planned but accepted when they came into existence? If we only allowed planned children to enter this world, we'd have a lot fewer people living in this world.
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. Now, so that is interesting that in the front of the United States Supreme Court, regarding the Dobbs decision that was coming out or that had been leaked, is the very first time in your entire adult life that you've ever shared your story about the fact that you were raped. And it just came out of you because this woman was asking you the question, what about rape? It's like God put this person right in front of you to ask the question. Mark, what about rape? What's your response to this?
I do believe that to be the case. I choose to have grace. People have made many comments about, "Oh, I would have punched this person," or person wouldn't have walked away if they'd said that to my face. I chose grace. I turned, and before I asked Tina to use the PA system, I made one phone call. I called my biological mother and I said, "Cindy, I need to share our story if it's okay." And she said, "If it will save one life, you tell our story as many times as you need to."
Wow.
So committed to life. And we've had some of these discussions as much as I can bear to burden her with discussions. I've asked her about a lot of this. And what she has always said to me is that having me did not ruin her life, but killing me absolutely would have ruined her life.
Wow. Well, you know, Mark, your story also, I think, underscores the importance of why churches, in this case, the Lutheran Church, was actually providing resources for women who were in your mom's situation. And if it wasn't for the church there giving that support and the physical help and assistance, who knows what would have happened to your mom? She might have been pushed into a situation where she felt she had no choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a key thing, that churches are so quick to provide shame, but not so quick to provide support. And I think it's less today than it was maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, that teen pregnancies or unwed mother pregnancies are a little more accepted within the church. But we shouldn't be shaming these people. We should be helping these people. They are in a situation that already exists. You can't undo them getting pregnant. That child already exists. And we need to start showing more support to these people and a lot less shame and judgment on these people.
Absolutely. That's why I say pastors and church leaders, they need to address this issue. And some are afraid to do it because it's controversial. Maybe that might offend somebody. Well, there's a way to be able to share the love and forgiveness and grace of Christ with the baseline that life is precious and it's the gift of God. Because if you don't speak up, Mark, if you don't speak up, pastors, churches, people in the pews don't speak up, there are going to be people like your mom. And they might receive information. They're going to receive it from someplace, and it might be that they're getting the wrong information and they make the wrong decision that would destroy their lives.
Well, and to give a little more, I haven't shared this before publicly, but I'll share it now. My younger sister became a teen mother. She got in a situation where she fell pregnant, and she was going to Los Angeles Lutheran High School. She had just started at Los Angeles Lutheran High School, and they were going to throw her out of school for being pregnant. But yet they allowed young ladies who'd had abortions to continue to go to school there. And it wasn't until we kind of called out that hypocrisy that they changed and said, oh, okay, well, we'll let her stay. But the fact that they even had that policy in the first place is unbelievable to me. I mean, how do you justify that?
I want to get you to address a couple of things just before we conclude. Number one, other stories or instances that you encountered in front of the Supreme Court regarding the Dobbs decision. And then also, some people say, well, you ought to have a rape and incest exception. I'll let you address that in just a few moments. But what other instances did you encounter in front of the U.S. Supreme Court?
A lot of hate. A lot of hate and a lot of love. And it was very interesting to see, because it was very, very clearly delineated who was hateful and who was celebrating life. And I think that there's a lot of hurt on the other side. I think that a lot of these people that are out there protesting and are so adamant and so violent and so aggressive are probably coming from a place of guilt. That they've either helped a friend get an abortion or have had an abortion themselves, or have gotten in a situation that they lucked out of, but would have used abortion as the remedy to their problems. And I don't think we win this battle by just having our hardened stance of, we believe this and that's it, and we're not going to talk to anybody about it. We're not going to discuss. We're not going to do anything. We have to open those discussions up, and we have to be open to that. And it's unfortunate that the other side, they come into our side. Whenever there's a pro-life case, or even at the end of the March for Life, I do the Silent No More testimonies of women who are post-abortive who regret their abortions. And they do those in front of the Supreme Court at the end of the March for Life every year. And other than the live nativity, that's my favorite event of the year, because those women are so heartfelt and their stories are just absolutely devastating, but absolutely joyous in their forgiveness. And so they sit there with megaphones in front of these women, bearing their souls, screaming the most vile, hateful things at them. And if you can't have enough humanity to understand that these women are post-abortive and hurting and regret killing their children, and give them enough grace to just be able to tell their story without spewing hate at them, I really don't know. I don't know how you approach those people.
Well, Mark, I think it goes back to what you said before. I mean, there's a lot of people that are hurt. This is dark and demonic. And so our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces in heavenly places, against this darkness. And so what you're doing is piercing the darkness with light, with truth and hope. You obviously are a result of rape. To those that say, well, you ought to have a rape and incest exception. Well, you know, you're an example. I also have in my family the very same thing, rape and incest in the same situation with my father against my sister. So, you know, life is life, and the circumstances around your conception, as you say, do not determine your value. I know that there was a lot of celebration as well when Roe versus Wade was overturned, and certainly that celebration needs to also resolve in work and continuing to protect families, mothers, and especially children. Mark, thank you for joining us on Freedom Alive. Thank you for your ministry, and thank you for your powerful testimony.
Thank you for having me.
What an incredible story that Mark shared with us. Someone who was conceived in rape and never shared that story until the very day that the abortion decision that overturned Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey was leaked in May of 2022. When someone simply asked, what about rape? It was almost like God was telling Mark, share your story. And he did. He actually shared his story for the very first time. It's a powerful story, but it also illustrates the face behind the issue of abortion. It's not just this fancy rhetoric that people slap on the issue of abortion, women's right to choose, or reproductive freedom. It's about life. God created each one of us as individuals, uniquely created in the very image of God. What an amazing story that after these many years, Mark conceived in rape, ashamed to even talk about it, now is a testimony about God's grace and forgiveness and reaching out to those who are angry on the other side for whatever reason, because of either hurt or some other kind of dark influence that might be in their lives. And yet, as a result of Mark's faithfulness, the church that actually gave a place to his mom, Cindy, he was able to reconnect with her. What a story of redemption. God is clearly in the story of redemption. And I would always say life is always the right choice. I know that's true in my own family, as I mentioned during the interview. My dad raped my sister, so there's rape and incest in the same event. And as tragic as that was for her, no doubt, she chose life. And she gave birth. And her daughter now has also chosen life and has given birth. There are 2 generations in my family from the sin of my father. Life is always the right choice. Well, in closing, remember Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, which says, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. So join us right here next time, where you will hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.